Emma was a loving, hard-working mother who had devoted her life to making sure her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, had everything she needed. Living in a small town, Emma had always been the heart of her community. She was known for her warm smile, kind words, and the way she cared for everyone around her. She always made sure to give her daughter the best life possible, even though life hadn't been easy for them. Emma was a single mother, and she worked long hours at a local job just to make ends meet, but she never complained. Her love for Lily was endless, and they shared a bond that was deeper than words could describe. For the past few years, Emma had been struggling with an illness that had taken a toll on her body. Although she tried to stay strong and keep a positive outlook, it was clear to those who loved her that she wasn't well. Despite her condition, Emma continued to put on a brave face for her daughter and the community. She often told Lily not to worry and assured her that everything would be all right. It was Emma's way of shielding Lily from the harsh realities of life. But one day, everything changed. Emma's illness worsened, and there was nothing the doctors could do. Her family, friends, and especially Lily, were left heartbroken as they realized Emma didn't have much time left. The once vibrant woman who had been so full of energy now lay in a hospital bed, too weak to even speak. Lily, who had been by her side every day, couldn't fully understand what was happening. All she knew was that her mother, the person who had always been there for her, was slipping away. When the doctors finally told the family that there was no hope, they were devastated. Emma's passing left a deep void in the lives of everyone who knew her. Lily, in particular, felt lost. She couldn't imagine life without her mother, who had always been there to tuck her in at night, wipe away her tears, and offer comforting words when life seemed difficult. The thought of facing the world alone was almost too much for the little girl to bear. The funeral arrangements were made quickly, and the entire town came together to support the grieving family. It was clear to everyone that Emma had touched many lives during her time in the small town. Her passing left a hole in the hearts of her neighbors, friends, and coworkers, all of whom came to pay their respects. The church was filled with flowers, and the air was thick with sadness. As the day of the funeral approached, Lily clung to the memories of her mother. She remembered the way Emma would make her laugh, even when she was feeling sick. She remembered their bedtime stories and the way Emma would tuck her in with a kiss on her forehead. But most of all, Lily remembered her mother's strength and love. It was that love that she held on to in the midst of her grief. Little did Lily know, the day of the funeral would bring an unexpected surprise, one that would change her life forever. The small town where Lily and her mother, Emma, had lived for so long was filled with sorrow. Emma had been a well-known and beloved figure in the community, and now her absence left a deep sadness that was hard to ignore. The streets, usually lively and busy, felt quieter than usual as everyone struggled to process the loss of such a kind-hearted soul. People who had known Emma for years spoke of her selflessness and the way she always put others before herself. Neighbors remembered how Emma would bring over homemade meals when someone was sick, or offer a listening ear when a friend needed advice. She had a way of making everyone feel important, even on the toughest days. Lily, too, felt the weight of the loss in ways that no one could quite understand. The little girl who once laughed and played with her mother now wandered through their house in a daze, the walls echoing with silence. She had trouble getting out of bed, and when she did, it was only to sit in the living room, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. The house, once filled with warmth and love, now felt cold and empty. Lily missed her mother's voice, the way she would call her name from the kitchen, or sing their favorite songs while cleaning up. Every little thing seemed to remind her of Emma, and the pain of missing her mother was almost too much for the young girl to bear. Lily's family, while grieving their own loss, tried their best to comfort her. Her grandmother, who lived nearby, came over every day, bringing with her the familiar smell of fresh cookies and the promise of stories to help distract Lily from the sadness. But no matter how many cookies were baked or stories told, it was clear that nothing could fill the hole left in Lily's heart. She simply couldn't understand why her mother had to go, and no one had the right words to explain it to her. The funeral preparations moved forward, as difficult as they were for everyone involved. The family chose a small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky. Emma had always loved nature, so it seemed fitting that she would rest in a place so peaceful. The community rallied together, offering their support in every way they could. Neighbors sent flowers, friends helped with the arrangements, and even strangers came to offer their condolences. Despite the support, Lily felt as though she were walking through a fog. She couldn't imagine facing the world without her mother by her side, and the thought of the funeral made her stomach churn with anxiety. She wasn't sure how she would say goodbye, or even if she could. But as the day approached, there was one thing Lily knew for certain. She would need all the love and support she could get to make it through this incredibly hard time. The funeral day arrived quickly, and the small town seemed to hold its breath, waiting. It wasn't just a funeral. It felt like the entire town was mourning the loss of someone who had been like family to everyone. People gathered in the church, exchanging quiet words of sympathy and trying to offer comfort in whatever way they could. But for Lily, it all felt surreal. How could her mother, the one who had been so strong for so long, be gone? She couldn't comprehend how life could continue without Emma in it. And little did she know, something incredible was about to happen that would give her a small glimmer of hope in the middle of her heartbreak. The day of the funeral was finally here, and the small town was filled with people gathered to say their final goodbyes to Emma. It was a quiet, somber atmosphere, with the air heavy with grief. Lily walked slowly, hand in hand with her grandmother, toward the church, her little face pale and filled with confusion. It felt like everything was happening in slow motion, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dreaming. Her heart ached in a way she didn't fully understand, and she kept asking herself why her mother wasn't there to hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. As the mourners entered the church, the sight of Emma's casket was enough to make the room feel even heavier. People sat in silence, offering their thoughts and prayers, as a soft music played in the background. It was a peaceful setting, but there was still that feeling of emptiness. Emma had always been the life of the room, her laughter and warmth filling any space she entered. Now, without her, it felt like the light had gone out. While everyone was focused on the somber occasion, there was one thing that stood out from the rest. In the back of the church, near the entrance, a figure stood quietly, looking around. It was Johnny Depp. His presence was not something anyone expected, and at first, no one could believe their eyes. It wasn't every day that a famous actor attended a small-town funeral, and yet here he was. Johnny Depp had been one of Emma's favorite celebrities, and she had always admired him, not just for his acting, but for his kindness and down-to-earth nature. For years, Emma had followed his career, sending letters to him as a fan. She would write about how much his work inspired her and how his movies helped her through difficult times. What Emma didn't know was that Johnny had received some of those letters and had kept them. He never forgot the words she had written, and he remembered how Emma had touched his heart. Word spread quickly that Johnny Depp was in the church, and many people whispered in disbelief, trying to process the unexpected turn of events. But he didn't come to the funeral for attention or to be in the spotlight. Instead, he was there to pay his respects to a woman who had meant so much to him. Even though they had never met in person, Johnny was known for his humility. And in that moment, he showed just how deeply he cared for Emma's memory. As he made his way through the crowd, Johnny kept his head down, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. His presence was quiet and respectful, and he didn't want to make a spectacle out of something as private and personal as this. The mourners who recognized him couldn't help but be amazed at the gesture, but Johnny stayed focused on the reason he was there, to honor Emma's life and to be there for her family. Lily, who had been too wrapped up in her sadness to notice anything else, caught a glimpse of Johnny as he stood at the back of the church. Her eyes widened in surprise. She had seen him on TV before and knew who he was, but seeing him in person at her mother's funeral was something she could never have imagined. Johnny didn't approach her right away. Instead, he stayed back, observing the service with a look of solemn respect on his face. Lily felt a mix of emotions: surprise, confusion, and a tiny spark of hope. The service continued, but Lily couldn't stop thinking about Johnny. She wondered what he was doing there and why he had come all the way to her mother's funeral. Little did she know, Johnny's presence was about to bring something unexpected into her life. A small, meaningful gesture that would change everything for her in the days to come. As the funeral service continued, Lily found it hard to focus on anything except the strange feeling in her chest. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man standing quietly at the back of the church. Johnny Depp. Why was he here? How could he, a famous actor she had only seen on television, be standing in her mother's funeral? It seemed so unreal. She had always admired her mother's love for Johnny Depp's movies and how she would smile whenever she spoke about him. But now, seeing him in person, it felt like a dream. How could this man, who was so far removed from her world, care enough to show up? Lily continued to steal glances at him from her seat. He wasn't speaking to anyone or drawing attention to himself. Instead, he stood in the back of the church, his face soft and respectful. The quiet respect in his demeanor made him seem more like an ordinary person than the celebrity she had always seen in magazines or movies. It was strange, but in that moment, he didn't feel so different from the people in the room who had known her mother for years. After the service ended, people slowly started to leave the church. Lily felt a sense of heaviness, like the weight of the day was settling into her heart. Her mother was gone, and nothing would ever feel the same again. Yet, as she made her way toward the door, something unexpected happened. Johnny Depp, who had been standing near the back, stepped forward, his presence still calm and quiet but undeniably noticeable. When Lily saw him moving toward her, her heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly want from her? Why was he coming over? He was a stranger to her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he had come there for a reason. Johnny stopped just a few feet away, and for a brief moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other. Lily, unsure of what to say, opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. Her mind raced. What could she possibly say to someone like him? Johnny gave her a soft, understanding smile, his eyes gentle and kind. He didn't rush to speak. Instead, he bent down slightly, so he was closer to her height, and said in a calm voice, "Lily, I know this must be so hard for you right now. Your mother was an incredible person, and I'm so sorry for your loss." His words were simple, but they felt sincere. There was no celebrity air about him, just a man who seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being. Lily could barely comprehend the situation, but she nodded slowly, surprised by his words and how comfortable they made her feel. Johnny's voice was warm, like he was a friend who had known her mother for years, not just a stranger who had shown up out of the blue. For a brief moment, the pain she had been feeling seemed to soften, as if the simple kindness of this man had given her a small sense of comfort. But Johnny didn't stop there. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in a soft cloth. He handed it to Lily, gently placing it in her hands. "This is for you," he said quietly. Lily, still in shock, looked down at the small gift in her hands. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver locket with an engraving on the back. Inside there was a small photo of her mother, Emma, smiling warmly. Lily gasped softly, her eyes wide with surprise. Johnny had made this locket specially for her mother. He had seen her letters and knew how much Emma had adored him. To think that this small, simple piece of jewelry, a token of kindness, had been created just for her, meant more to Lily than words could express. Johnny smiled at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Your mom will always be with you, Lily. She's in your heart, and now you'll always have a piece of her with you too." Lily's throat tightened as she tried to hold back the tears. She wasn't sure what she felt more: shock, gratitude, or just the overwhelming love that seemed to fill her heart at that moment. Johnny Depp, the man who had once seemed so far out of reach, had just done something so personal and meaningful. He had taken the time to understand the pain she was feeling and had given her a piece of comfort, a way to hold on to her mother forever. It was a moment Lily would never forget. Lily stood there, holding the locket in her hands, completely overwhelmed by what had just happened. She didn't know how to process the emotions swirling inside her. Johnny Depp, the man who had brought so much joy to her mother, had just given her something so personal and meaningful. It wasn't just a locket. It was a way for her to carry a part of her mother with her, always. The weight of it in her hands was a reminder that no matter how much time passed, Emma's love would never truly leave her. Johnny smiled gently at her and took a step back, giving her space. He didn't say anything else. He just let her process the moment. Lily looked down at the locket again, feeling the soft silver against her fingers. It was so beautiful, and the picture inside, though small, was clear and full of her mother's warmth. The locket seemed to glow in the dim light of the church, as if it held all the love and memories Emma had shared with her. Her grandmother, who had been standing nearby, noticed the exchange. She had seen Johnny walk up to Lily and couldn't believe what she was witnessing. It wasn't every day that a celebrity showed such genuine kindness, especially at such a personal moment. She quietly approached them, standing a little behind Lily, unsure if she should speak or just let the moment unfold. Johnny, seeing the older woman, nodded in her direction and gave her a soft, respectful smile. "I just wanted to do something to help," he said quietly. His voice was calm and sincere, and there was no sign of ego or self-importance. "Your daughter is strong, and her mother was a wonderful woman. I know this is hard, but I hope this little gesture will remind her that love never goes away." Lily's grandmother nodded, touched by his words. She didn't know how to express her gratitude, but knew that Johnny's gesture would mean more to Lily than anyone could understand. She gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, comforting her, while still allowing her space to take in the moment. Lily, still holding the locket close to her chest, turned to Johnny, her eyes wide with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The simple words felt like they held so much weight, as if they carried all the gratitude she couldn't quite express. Johnny nodded again, giving her a reassuring smile. "I'm happy to do it," he replied softly. "Your mom was special. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone, Lily. You've got a lot of people who care about you, even if they're not always around." Lily could feel the sincerity in his words, and for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know how it was possible, but this kind stranger had somehow made her feel less alone. Johnny wasn't just a celebrity to her anymore. He was someone who had cared enough to show up when it mattered most. As the minutes passed, the funeral home started to empty out, and the crowd began to thin. Lily still stood there, holding the locket, trying to wrap her mind around everything that had just happened. Her heart ached for her mother, but at the same time, she felt a small sense of peace. Johnny's presence, his kind words, and his thoughtful gift had created a small bridge between her pain and the love that still surrounded her. Johnny stayed for a little while longer, speaking with a few of Emma's friends and offering his condolences to those who had gathered. His calm, genuine nature made him blend in with the mourners, even though he was a world-famous actor. It was as if he didn't want to be treated as a celebrity, but instead as someone who understood what it meant to lose someone you loved. Before he left, Johnny approached Lily one last time, offering her a warm hug. She was surprised, but the hug felt comforting, like a friend who had known her for a long time, even if they had just met. It was brief but meaningful, and Lily could feel a sense of healing beginning to take root in her heart. "Take care of yourself, Lily," Johnny said quietly, pulling back from the hug. "And remember, you've got this. Your mom would be proud of you." As Johnny left the funeral home, Lily stood there holding the locket, feeling like something had shifted inside her. The grief was still there, but it didn't feel quite as overwhelming. For the first time since her mother's passing, Lily felt a tiny spark of hope. Johnny Depp, a man she had only ever seen on a screen, had come into her life in the most unexpected way, and in doing so, he had helped her take one small step toward healing. In the days that followed the funeral, Lily found herself holding onto the locket that Johnny Depp had given her more than she ever expected. It was more than just a beautiful piece of jewelry. It was a connection to her mother, a way to keep her spirit close when everything else felt so empty. Every time Lily looked at the locket or touched it gently, she felt as though Emma was still there with her, offering comfort in the way only a mother could. Despite the overwhelming grief that still lingered in her heart, Lily started to take small steps toward healing. She would sit in her mother's favorite chair in the living room, gently running her fingers over the locket, and remember the little things. Emma's laughter, her warmth, and the stories she would tell before bed. Those memories brought a sense of peace that Lily hadn't felt in days. She could almost hear her mother's voice, reminding her that everything would be okay, even if it didn't feel that way right now. Her grandmother, who had been by her side through it all, continued to support Lily in every way she could. She helped with everyday tasks, like making breakfast and folding laundry, but more importantly, she gave Lily the space to grieve. There were moments when they would sit together in silence, and though the sadness still hung in the air, it felt comforting to know they weren't alone in their pain. The bond between them deepened as they both tried to adjust to life without Emma. One afternoon, Lily was sitting in the backyard, the sun casting long shadows across the garden, when her grandmother joined her. She sat down next to Lily, offering her a cup of warm tea. They didn't talk much, but the quiet company was enough. After a while, Lily finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. "Grandma, do you think Mom knows that I miss her?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. It was a question she had asked herself many times, but hadn't dared to ask out loud until now. Her grandmother took a deep breath and put a hand on Lily's shoulder, giving her a comforting squeeze. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice gentle, "I think your mom knows exactly how much you miss her. Love like that doesn't go away, even when the person is no longer with us. She'll always be a part of you, in the way you love, the way you care, and the way you keep her memory alive." Lily nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. It was hard to imagine a world without her mother's presence. Yet her grandmother's words brought a small comfort, a sense of reassurance that maybe, just maybe, Emma was still watching over her. The days turned into weeks, and Lily found herself going through the motions of life, though everything felt different now. School started again, and though she didn't feel ready, her teachers and friends were supportive. They didn't push her to talk about her mother, but they made sure she knew they were there for her whenever she was ready to share. It was in those moments, when she was surrounded by kind people, that Lily started to understand how love, both given and received, had the power to help heal even the deepest wounds. Still, there was something missing. Lily couldn't help but feel like there was more to the gift Johnny Depp had given her than just the locket. His kindness, his presence, and the way he made her feel understood. She had never experienced anything like it before. It was as though he had come into her life to show her that even in the darkest moments, there were small rays of light, people who cared enough to help guide the way. Lily hadn't expected Johnny to be so kind, so thoughtful. The way he had respected her grief, given her the locket, and shared his words of encouragement meant more than she could express. She wondered if she would ever get the chance to thank him properly, to let him know how much his actions had meant to her. One evening, as she sat at her desk, the locket resting in her hand, Lily decided to write a letter. It wasn't just any letter. It was a letter to Johnny Depp. She didn't know if he would ever read it, but she felt that it was important to express her gratitude. The words flowed easily as she poured her heart out, describing how his kindness had made a difference in her life. She talked about how it had brought her some peace in the midst of her pain, and how it reminded her that there was still love in the world, even in the hardest times. After she finished the letter, Lily placed it in an envelope, wondering if it would ever make its way to Johnny. She knew it was a long shot, but she also knew that sometimes taking a chance was worth it. especially when it came to expressing gratitude. Lily sealed the envelope and put it aside, feeling a sense of relief, as if she had done something important. She didn't know if Johnny would ever read it, but she hoped that somehow, through her. Weeks passed since Lily wrote the letter to Johnny Depp, and while she didn't expect a response, the small hope that he might somehow read her words kept her heart open. Life, though still challenging, had started to settle into a new routine. Her grief hadn't disappeared, but it no longer consumed every moment of her day. With the support of her grandmother and the kindness of her friends, Lily was slowly learning how to live with the sadness rather than fighting it. One afternoon, as Lily was helping her grandmother prepare dinner, the doorbell rang. Her grandmother was the first to answer it, and Lily continued to stir the soup on the stove, not thinking much of the interruption. But then, she heard a voice from the doorway that made her heart skip a beat. "Lily, is Lily here?" The voice was unmistakable. It was Johnny Depp. Lily's hand froze on the spoon, and for a moment, she couldn't move. She looked toward the door, her eyes wide in disbelief. There, standing in the doorway, was Johnny Depp himself. It wasn't a dream or a wishful thought. It was real. Her grandmother stood beside him, looking at Lily with a warm, knowing smile, as if this moment had been carefully planned. "Johnny," Lily whispered, her voice a mix of shock and awe. She had no idea how he had found her or why he was here, but the surprise and wonder were overwhelming. Johnny smiled softly and stepped inside, his presence still as calm and kind as she remembered from the funeral. He wasn't the larger-than-life celebrity she had once seen on television. He was just a man, standing there to honor a promise he hadn't even made, but had kept nonetheless. "Hi, Lily," Johnny said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I hope it's all right if I stopped by. I got your letter." Lily's heart raced. She had never expected him to actually read it, let alone show up at her doorstep. But there he was in her home, looking at her with understanding eyes. I didn't expect you to come," Lily said, struggling to find the right words. Her mind was still trying to catch up to the reality of the situation. "How did you get my letter?" Johnny chuckled softly, as though the idea of his actions being a big mystery was amusing. "Well, it wasn't easy," he admitted, "but I've got some good people who know how to find things, and your letter really touched me. I wanted to make sure I could personally thank you for your kind words. It meant a lot to me." Lily was speechless, her thoughts swirling. How could this be happening? Johnny Depp, the man who had been a source of comfort to her in a time of loss, was now standing in front of her, just as genuine and kind as before. Her grandmother, who had been standing quietly off to the side, nodded toward Lily. "Why don't you show Johnny the garden, dear? It's a beautiful day outside, and I'm sure he'd love to see it." Lily, still a little in shock, nodded without saying much. She didn't know what to do, but her grandmother's gentle suggestion felt like the right thing. Johnny, sensing her hesitation, smiled and gave her some space. "Lead the way, Lily," he said with a wink, trying to make her feel more at ease. The two of them stepped outside into the backyard, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft glow over the flowers and trees. It was a peaceful place, one that had always brought comfort to Lily and her family. As they walked, the weight of the moment started to sink in. Johnny wasn't just here as a celebrity. He was here as a person who genuinely cared about her well-being. "Your garden is beautiful," Johnny said, looking around at the flowers and the greenery. "It's clear that a lot of love went into it." Lily smiled, feeling a little more comfortable as they talked about the simple things, the weather, the garden, and the small details that made life feel a little more normal. There was something about Johnny's presence that made everything feel lighter. He wasn't rushing her or pushing for anything more than just a quiet conversation. It felt like talking to an old friend, not someone who lived a life so different from her own. After a few minutes of walking through the garden, Johnny turned to Lily, his expression soft and sincere. "I wanted to give you something else," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box and handed it to her. "I know this isn't going to fix everything, but I hope it brings you some peace." Lily looked at the box in her hands, her fingers gently tracing the edges. Her heart was racing, but she couldn't help but feel grateful for the kindness that seemed to pour from him without any expectation in return. Over the next few weeks, Lily's life began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. Johnny Depp's visit had left a lasting impression on her, and the kindness he had shown her in such a dark time remained with her. The bracelet he had given her, along with the locket, had become a symbol of something she never thought she would feel again: hope. It wasn't that her grief had completely disappeared, but it no longer defined every moment of her life. The simple acts of kindness from Johnny and the support of her grandmother helped her realize that though life was different now, it wasn't entirely empty. She wore the bracelet every day, its delicate charm resting against her wrist as a constant reminder that love could still find a way to shine through even in the hardest of times. Whenever the sadness crept in, as it often did, she would touch the bracelet or the locket and remember Johnny's words, "You're not alone." One afternoon, while sitting with her grandmother on the porch, Lily thought back on everything that had happened. She could hardly believe that a man who had seemed so distant and unreachable, someone who lived a life she could only dream of, had become such a meaningful part of her journey. Johnny's simple acts of kindness had bridged the gap between celebrity and ordinary life, showing her that even the smallest gestures could have a profound impact on someone's heart. "I never thought I would get through this," Lily said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. "But I think I'm starting to." Her grandmother, sitting beside her, gave her a knowing smile. "Your mom would be proud of you, Lily. You're stronger than you think." Lily smiled back, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. It was as if her grandmother's words were the final puzzle piece she had been searching for. She had always thought of strength as something that came from within, but now she understood that it wasn't just about pushing through. It was about accepting help, opening her heart to love, and finding moments of peace amidst the chaos. One day after school, Lily was surprised to find an envelope waiting for her at home. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable: Johnny Depp. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the letter, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it. Inside, Johnny had written a short message, simple but full of warmth. "Lily, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know things have been hard, but remember that you have a whole world of people who care about you, whether they're near or far. I'm always here if you need someone to talk to. Take care of yourself, and don't forget that your mom's love is always with you." Lily read the letter several times, each word sinking deeper into her heart. It wasn't just the message itself that touched her. It was the fact that Johnny had taken the time to reach out, to remind her that she wasn't forgotten. That someone who had so much going on in his own life still cared enough to check in on her. A young girl who had lost her mother. It felt like another small piece of light in the darkness. Over the next few months, things continued to get better for Lily. She found herself slowly returning to activities she had enjoyed before, like painting and reading, and began to smile again. It wasn't the same as before, but it was enough. She would never forget her mother, and there would always be moments when the sadness felt too heavy to bear. But now she had a deeper understanding of what it meant to live with love, to honor the past while also embracing the future. Johnny's kindness had given her the strength to move forward, and she would carry his words with her for the rest of her life. She had learned that even in the darkest of times, people could show up in unexpected ways, offering light when it was needed most. And sometimes, all it took was one person's belief in her to remind her that she was never truly alone. As she sat by the window, watching the sun set in the distance, Lily thought of her mother, her grandmother, and Johnny, 3 people who had helped her find her way through the storm. She felt a quiet sense of peace wash over her, knowing that no matter what the future held, she was stronger now than she had ever been. And that, above all, was something her mother would have been proud of.